González, we finished that part of our interview when you were talking about three things about the communities in Los Barrios.
Yeah, I was saying that when you go to most of our barrios, there are three institutions that are there all the time. There are many groups that come in when there's federal money or some church wants to come in and do a mission, and they come for 10 minutes, 10 days, 10 months, and then they leave. They come to do a study and they ask all kinds of questions and then they leave. But basically the three things are always there. The schools, and the schools are generally in very bad condition. They're very often filled with violence, and they're dangerous, and the parents have very little participation because the school board doesn't give them much of a chance to participate in any active way to correct what's going on. Churches. There are churches in our barrios have been there for 50 years, 70 years. And bars. Now, I don't think you can expect much from bars. And the schools, as I say, don't do much either. And the place where people really have a chance to develop, to learn leadership, to learn how to express themselves, how to organize, how to make projects and work, is a church. And one of the reasons why I'm so much interested in the education of the Latina pastoral leadership is that they are the people who are right there on the front line in those institutions, giving them shape. And as they are shaped and as they develop, they are also developing new leaders, and they're determining the future of the whole community, what's going to happen. If the churches don't follow that path, if the churches are happy with just preaching and getting people together and so on, there's very little hope in the community for any kind of change.
Right.
So it's very important that we do something about training the leadership of the churches. And that doesn't mean necessarily going to very big schools, doesn't mean necessarily getting all kinds of degrees, but it means giving them, providing them the opportunity to have whatever education is best for the work that they are doing, the way that they are called to do.
Wonderful. As you look at the diversity of the Latino communities in U.S., Dr. González, if I would ask you three things that you see there as part of the identity of the community, what would you say?
I think that there are three things that none of them are exclusively Latino, and very few, not everybody has all three characteristics. But I say one is language and culture. It's either Spanish or Portuguese, and it's the food. Very often, many people have made studies that once people don't have feijoada, people don't have speak Portuguese anymore, they still have the feijoada every once in a while. Okay, and if they are not, the Puerto Ricans no longer speak Spanish, they still have their arroz con gandules. Okay, so it's that's one of the elements that gives it identity, and it's an identity that's both dispersing and bringing people together, because Brazilian identity is very different from Colombian identity.
Right.
So in many ways, it makes our community very diverse, but it's within the context of the larger culture, it brings us together. That's one thing. I think the second one is poverty. Again, there are many other people in our communities who are poor, but one of the common characteristics of Latino communities is that they are poor. And we were hearing today something that I have said before, that the way that most of the traditional Protestant churches found churches and buildings means that Latinos are mostly not able to afford being Presbyterian or Methodist or Lutheran.
Right.
So I think that's the second one. The poverty. And the third has to do with race. And again, race for us is a very complex thing. When I was at school, when I was a kid, we always had the Dia de la Raza, the Day of the Race. And it was not as it would have meant in the U.S., a particular race. It was precisely the mixture. We celebrated, we probably shouldn't have, but we celebrated October 30th, or October 12th, the day of the so-called discovery. Columbus didn't discover anything; he was lost anyhow. but we celebrated. When we did that day, we called it the Day of the Race. Meaning by that, not Spanish or Indian or African, but this conglomerate that we are, and we are a wide range of people that includes people, with pure European blood and people who have pure Korean blood, and in between people with all kinds of African and Native American mixtures and so on. And that's who we are. And although for the outside culture that doesn't seem to be a race, for us that diversity itself means that we all experience the same kind of discrimination from the dominant culture, but we also work at race in a different way than the dominant culture works.
I see. Yes.
We evaluate. We look at race in a very, very different way, and I think those three things are crucial. Now, obviously, religion and the church play a very important role. Most Latinos and Latinas are Christian of some kind. There are now a few Muslims, not too many. There are some Jews, but not too many. There are some native religions that are coming back up. Some Afro American religions are coming up, Afro-Caribbean, Candomblé, that kind of thing. But all in some way or another, there's this Christian background. As a matter of fact, if you look at the U.S. Population, of all the various groups that the census divides people in, probably the one with the largest percentage of actual active Christians is the Latino community. And so that means that even though we are 15% of the population, when you start talking about churches, in any church that really represents the society, we are more than 15%.
I see.
Now, obviously, there are some of our churches like yours and mine that don't. But that means that it's not only that we don't represent, that we are below the percentage of population that's Latina, but we are much below the percentage of the population that's Latino Christian.
Right.
So that's
exactly. That's right. And what do you say about this 11 million non-documented immigrants, that many of them are Latinos as well? Because what do you think? Their presence is so important for this country, right? And still there's difficulties for anything that the law that would pass that they would stay. What do you think is their presence here means?
Well, I think part of the problem is that they have become a political football. And the people use the issue of immigration to kick around in order to make points with the people who vote who are not the immigrants. And so it's the immigrants that get kicked around. I always feel sorry for the ball in the football game, because everybody kicks it. And I think that's very often what happens with our people. I mean, they are used to, and not only by those who are against immigration, but very often by those who talk a good talk about immigration, but they don't deliver, but they talk that because they're hoping that way to gain some points with a particular political base.
I see.
And so I think that's one of the issues. I think that the other issues are obviously economically, this country cannot survive without those immigrants. So no matter how much you kick the political football around, what's going to make the goal is the actual reality that the country cannot subsist without them. I mean, you have a very conservative, right-wing people in California who are asking that all kinds of laws be passed against immigrants, but at the same time they want to be able to keep their farm workers. So it's somebody else, but we have to find a way to work our situation.
Exactly.
So I think that's part of it. The other thing, obviously, is that immigration very often has to do with an economic disbalance. And what people don't realize is that until 1910, more people went from the U.S. to Latin America than the other way around. It was emigration from the U.S. and immigration into Latin America. There were more people going from the U.S. to Mexico, and that's what happened. That's why you ended up with the Texas issue, with the war with Mexico, and all that kind of thing. So you had that, and it's only when at the time of the Mexican Revolution, the economy of Mexico got all befuddled and difficult and went into chaos, that you began getting the huge waves of people who were fleeing from violence or from poverty or from economic disaster, whatever. And so I think that one of the issues is I don't think that you can really close a border when you have the kind of differences that you have. It's like trying to build a dam across the middle of the Atlantic, and have one side be higher than the other. There's no way, you can't do that. So it's not going to happen. So I think that's another issue that plays into that. Obviously, part of the problem then with the problem of being undocumented is that the social services are not available, so that the health suffers and education suffers, and crime increases because people don't dare go to the police if somebody commits a crime against them in the community. They don't dare go to the police because they themselves feel that they don't have the papers necessary, and it might backfire on them. So you have lots of people, constantly you hear when you're in our barrios, you hear about somebody who had money and couldn't put it in the bank because they didn't have a social security number, and they kept it in a drawer in their house, and somebody came and broke in, and they even know who it was, but they cannot do anything because if they go to the police and say it, then they're in trouble. So you have all those issues that people usually don't realize. And the other thing that's happening, obviously, is that well, I think two things are happening. One thing is that a new way of being Latino is being developed in the U.S.
Say more.
A Mexican has many more chances of meeting a Dominican or a Brazilian or a Puerto Rican in Chicago than they do in Mexico City.
Right.
A Brazilian has many more chances of meeting a Colombian in California than they do in Sao Paulo. And so you're having this mixture that's taking place that in many ways is much more active and diverse than any place in Latin America. And you have to realize also that even if you don't count the Portuguese-speaking people, the largest Spanish-speaking countries in the Western Hemisphere are Mexico, Argentina, and the U.S.
Wow.
Okay. So there are more Spanish-speaking people in the U.S. than there are in Venezuela or in Peru or in Chile. Okay, and now obviously Brazil is different matter because it's huge,
sure.
and the immigration is not as large. But in the case of Spanish, that's very clear. So you have this different way of being Latino. The other thing that's happening is that our people are beginning to intermarry with people who are either immigrants from other backgrounds or who are Anglo or Afro-American. And that means that things get much more confused.
Nice.
Which means that I think that for all of us, not just for Latinos, for everybody in this country, identity is number one issue.